Next, I'll ask Dr. Moody to discuss Instructional Day Design Committee update, please.
While I'm doing this, I'll ask my crew to join us. If Leanne and Becky and Luke and Jennifer will come forward, and Tim. Is Tim here? I thought I saw him. Yeah, they'll come up to the table to answer questions. I try to put in your package a memo that kind of tells you where we've been at it with this work. And we had a larger committee, but these principals volunteered to be here tonight to speak to any questions that you might have as they served on the committee. They started looking at their role was to look at the instructional day. And they started looking at the research about when you should go to school and what was happening in the instructional day. That happened before we had the snow. And then after we had the snow, we all became very concerned, and I'm just going to remind you about this as well. The legislature changed about days of students could come to work. So they gave us the option of going by hours instead of days. And so people ask the question, well, why now? Why the question? And that's because we just recently have had that option in the last 2 years, and then we had a lot of snow, so it raised the question. I thought we had some more consistency across the district than we did. So when we really started digging into it, this district administrators group started looking at all the times of days, and we shared that with you in a previous meeting. We go to school at 11, 12, 13, 15, some number, different times a day. Some teachers are required to work 7.5 hours, some 8.5 hours. We were inconsistent across the board. We had so many start and stop times. So we came up with these goals. We combined these groups and came up with these goals about trying to find consistent start times by grade levels, consistent work hours for all our employees to make that fair and equitable, a later start time because we go to school 30 minutes earlier than all the schools around us, and that causes problems with having school delayed during inclement weather. We wanted parameters inside that instructional day, and we wanted to flip the high school with the elementary school. Well, we met on April the 7th, and when we gave that all to Tim, he ran all the routes, and he came back, he said, we can do everything you've asked us to do instructionally. We need 19 more buses and 19 new bus drivers. And I forget the cost of a bus is $84,000 a piece, but we'll be able to do that for you. And obviously we all gasped and said, well, there's no way that that's going to happen. So then we started re-brainstorming, and this group just kept digging in. Tim and his crew kept digging in and over. I don't know how many routes Tim must have ran trying to get a solution to this answer, but they were finally able to meet almost every single goal, and this is what he has for you tonight, or what we have for you as a committee. And I'll let the committee speak to the process themselves, but what we've been able to do is for you to, and we hope that you would vote on our recommendation at the end of the month, is that we can have 2 start times, 7:30 and 8:30. Half of our elementary schools will go to school at 7:30, half of them at 8:30, because they can't all start at one time. That was impossible. Our middle schools will start at 7:30 in the morning, and our high schools will start at 8:30. That means that we start school about 20 minutes later than we did. We didn't get the whole 30 minutes, but we got about a 20-minute later start. Our high schools don't start at 9 o'clock, but they start at 8:30, which is a lot better than 7:30 for high school students with the research. We have consistent start times. We would recommend that teachers report to work 30 minutes prior, and they work 30 minutes after. So it's an 8-hour day. It's consistent. They still have other duties above that, by the way, that they may be required because they are salaried employees. But that would be their required day. That would be consistent across the district. So if you had a 7:30 start time, for example, you would report to work at 7 o'clock, and if your end of your day was at 2:30, you would work until 3, required time. So that, we felt like that met almost all the goals that we had, but it was really from this committee staying persistent and Tim staying persistent through that. So I'm going to be quiet and see if any of you would like to speak to anything that happened during the committee, or Jennifer? Yeah, push the
athletic
mic.
piece.
Oh, yes, please do. Push the red button.
And hold it. Okay. With Southeast Athletics, right now, our students report to homeroom at 7:10 in the morning. We're the earliest school in the district. All after-school activities for middle schools start at 4:30, which means we supervise students for 2 hours after school prior to every athletic home event, which has been huge for our faculty and our staff. But it also means all of our student athletes have came to school to start their day at 7:10, and we've really collaborated with our community to especially feed our kids after school, because it's a really long time, a really long day for them. And we're in a different boat than all the other middle schools. These start and stop times streamlines us with our peers.
Any other questions? Chuck?
Does this have the magical 10 minutes built into it?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
We mustn't forget that. Dr. Miller?
I'm sure that in your deliberations, but I'd just like to hear you say it, that it wasn't possible for either bus needs or whatever to try to keep the feeder elementaries to the same junior high on the same time frame. I mean, because I see it's mixed, you know. Was that a consideration that you even looked at? I'm just curious.
Absolutely.
Like
And,
all the east ones.
Yes, and
Yeah.
it's just not possible. With the fact that we have 20 elementary schools and our sharing patterns and our efficiency rating, it just wasn't possible. I know Dr. Moody had mentioned the amount of routes that we ran. I think it was about 84,000 routes, which is roughly the same amount the price of a bus would be. So it was a lot. We put a lot of work into this.
Susan?
And just for clarity for me, if you look up on the screen at the next to the last paragraph, number 1 says a later start date for the high school. Should that be time?
Oh, yeah. Please don't let that get out. Good Lord.
I was just going to say that I really appreciate this committee working to be able to make this possible, because having the consistency makes a huge difference, especially with the teachers and the staff within the Rowan-Salisbury School. And to be able to say that all elementary schools are going to start at this time, middle schools are going to start at this time, and then high school, that is huge to be able to say that for our school district. And I really applaud Tim for all his hard work. He spent numerous hours and was able, like he told Dr. Moody, anything's possible. You know, 84,000 a bus times 19 buses, we can do anything. But he was able to make this work, and it met all the criteria that this committee wanted for the most part. So I'm really proud of it.
And we really wanted to, we looked hard at the community as well. It wasn't just about what was best for our employees or what was best for us. We talked a lot about what was best for the children and then the community at large, and looking at start and stop times. The last time we met, one of the proposals was to start elementary schools at 9 a.m. And we all said no, that for our community and for our working parents, that's a nightmare. There's no way that we could do that. So this is really the end of a whole lot of hard work, a lot of discussions, a lot of good brainstorming, and I think our committee feels really good about this proposal. Can I add one more personnel piece? With all the bus routes that Tim ran, if we follow this model, it protects all of our bus drivers' jobs, their time, their benefits. They may have to shift from one homeschool to another, but it takes care of our personnel as much as it takes care of our schools, our teachers, and our kids.
And we did take the child care into consideration, whereas now with elementary starting consistently early, parents are able to drop them off and get to work by 8 o'clock, whereas previously they had to worry about morning child care. It just reversed it to the afternoon, so that was taken into consideration.
Dr. Moody?
Two things instructionally that this committee really worked hard on that I think are important is the elementary schools stood firmly that they really need to go to school first because they need that hour and a half literacy block uninterrupted time. And if they go to school later, they can't get it in before lunch. And elementary students, after lunch with that literacy block, it does not work instructionally. The high school's exactly the flip of that. It really started from a conversation with the high school principals saying, please let us go to school later. Our kids don't even wake up. And if you think about, and that's what all the research says, and also think about on those foggy days or snow days, we have a lot of drivers. This allows our student drivers, our 16-year-olds, to drive after the sun comes up to school. So it's a safety issue as well as an instructional issue for them. So it hit all of our instructional goals, and that was the number one priority. And that's why Tim kept going, I got to find an answer because I know instructionally you need something different to happen.
When you take into consideration what we're doing now, 54% higher failure rates from first period to second period in my building. It's because they're still asleep. After doing this research, 8:30 is the absolute earliest that our high school students, when you take into consideration that 300 of our students at Salisbury High School are also athletes and sometimes don't get off a bus till 10:30 or 11 o'clock at night, and then if they ride the bus, the latest any of our buses show up for our 7:30 start time is 6:45. So some of them may get home at 10 or 11 at night and have to be back on a bus by 5:30 the next morning, and we wonder why they're asleep. So for this, it's the perfect match between being able to get them there later for the high school, but not interrupting the athletic and extracurricular piece, because it's not past 4 o'clock. We don't run into having to delay games or get them out early so that they're missing instructional time unless it's quite a distance away. If we had a bunch of 1A schools, that may be into play because they would have so far to travel, but with all of our schools being at least 2A and some of those 3A, we play teams fairly close to where that's typically not going to happen unless they're at a regional event.
Yeah, and that was going to be my next question, so that answered that. Thank you. Dr. Miller?
And I was just going to reiterate, Luke, yes, there are some of us that know that 1A timeline en route and fought hard to get away from that, so that is a very cogent point.
Dean?
I was just going to ask, how does this affect, and you kind of alluded to it just now, Luke, and maybe Tim can answer, I would like to know the earliest bus route, like bus stops. How does this affect that? Because that was a question that came up before with children waiting so early and getting home so late. So does this affect us positively, I hope, in some way?
Absolutely, and we won't know exactly until all the routes are run this summer, but we're looking at least 20 minutes later start time in the mornings.
So the earliest time you're anticipating would be?
5:45. Right now,
That a child would be getting on the bus at 5:45?
I'm sorry. Right now, we have buses leaving out 5:15, 5:20. We're hoping to push it back as close to 6 o'clock before the buses actually leave the schools.
Okay.
So that'll put the students on the buses, 6:10, 6:15 at the earliest. That's our goal. And I feel like we can accomplish that.
The numbers themselves, doing this in another district a couple of years ago, the numbers themselves, until they can actually run all the routes, are impossible to know. But just looking at the logic, the longest routes are the high school routes. And so those starting at 8:30 with elementary and middle starting, some of the elementary and middle starting earlier, for the most part, you're going to be able to start those routes later than you would have had that been a start time for a high school. Does that make sense?
Chuck?
It's not perfect, but it's really consistent, and I like that in the plan or program. You guys did an excellent job on this. I really want to commend you. I'm really impressed. Thank you very much.
Dr. Moody?
One of the things I wanted to kind of forewarn you of, the one thing that we weren't able to make happen is when we looked at splitting the elementaries from 7:30 to 8:30, the ones that are going at 8:30 are currently either going at 8:30 or 8:15 or close to that now. The ones that were going at 7:30 or near that, we tried to move them. The only school that's going to have a big shift next year other than the obvious high school shift and elementary shift, would be Overton Elementary. Overton will be on this schedule going at 7:30.
They'll start at 8:30. They're currently at
8:30, I'm
7:30.
sorry, instead of 7:30, and that will be a big change for their parents in before-school care. But we have more riders at Overton than we do a lot of our schools, not bus riders. And that was the one school that we would have to have a shift in because they have to share with Knox Middle School to make this work. So we didn't really have a choice in that. So there, if you hear a pushback, the pushback, that was the one school that'll have the biggest shift is Overton.
Dr. Miller.
This is a related issue to the time one. It's a transportation issue, but one thing we've heard in the appeals committee has been a need for particularly students transported to Henderson not necessarily being in mixed groups with either EC kids or whatever. So as you're looking at the whole transportation point, our obligation to provide transportation from anywhere in the county to those at Henderson, if that could be in not so much mixed groups, I think we might see fewer issues that come to us in the appeals committee, because some of them are because of we're traveling with different identified students on those buses, and maybe ones that aren't very compatible with each other. And
Well, that's one
that's
thing-
a whole different thing, but since you're in the whole transportation, give that some thought as well.
Well, that's one thing that this plan actually keeps intact is early college in Henderson, because they're considered a 3-tier. They run so much later. We will not affect those routes whatsoever. So we'll be able to keep those students on buses that are not mixed with other schools, yes.
And we've actually been able to help that out a little bit, because I have a driver that drives just for Cleveland and goes straight and does the Henderson route. So we're trying to work.
And we have had issues brought to us relative to behaviors with non-Henderson students that if we didn't have them on the same bus, and so that'll be an improvement, I think. don't you,
Right, and
Susan?
this will keep that intact, so that should not be an issue.
Susan.
By intact, do you mean as it is occurring currently, or are you able to do the bus route so that there isn't a mixture of differing needs children?
Yes, ma'am. The way that it will work out is Henderson students will be on buses with other Henderson students only. Yes, ma'am.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you, folks. And on behalf of the board, thank you again, because we know this is not an easy task or an overnight task. So, and there probably will be some pushback, but again, I think the more we can explain it, the more we understand as a board, which is important. So I appreciate you pointing that out about Overton too. That's part of our job. So thank you very much. Next, we have Tara. And let me preface the next two items. We have the budget discussion with Tara, and then we also have capital projects with Anthony. This is probably going to be the two big